going to get right to it. We're going to bring up some rock stars to talk about, how we support founders of color in the next few years, despite the what I call now the counterpunch for DEI. I'm going to ask the speakers to come on stage, Jewel, Melissa, and Anastasia. Um, there's a lot of things that have been happening. I'll kind of give some context in a second. But a lot of things have been happening over the last few months, and it's been a hot button topic, not only here in Atlanta, but across the country, and quite honestly, even the world. And so we're going to have a conversation. And again, there's going to be a little bit of Q&A, right? So they're not going to talk to you for 45 minutes. This is going to be a back and forth conversation. And let me set some context too. They may not be able to answer everything, and I'll just kind of jump in and say it. But we'll try to get as real, as raw as possible. And again, we are about transparency here at Goody Nation. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. Let's do some introductions first to kind of get the mood going and stuff. We'll start with Anastasia, but if you could name, company, role, and a little bit about what you do.
Okay, so good morning. Thank you all for coming in, braving the Atlanta traffic, and listening to us today. My name is Anastasia Simon. I am the investment principal at Techstars Atlanta and Techstars Impact, both powered by Cox Enterprises here in the great city of Atlanta.
There it is.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Melissa Pigas, and I'm the managing director for Techstars Atlanta and Techstars New Orleans, both powered by JP Morgan.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jewel Burke-Solomon, and I am a managing partner at Collab Capital.
Awesome. Okay, so just a little bit of context, and you all feel free to share thoughts or not, no pressure. But just to make sure we're on the same page, over the last few months, a number of things have been happening, and really going back even further than the last few months. But number of lawsuits been coming out around entrepreneur support programs, funds that intentionally support founders of color, lawsuits against the Fearless Fund. You've also seen the same group. I was going to say attack. That's actually what they're doing, but let me be a little bit more political there. They're more so, they've submitted lawsuits against actual law firms, which you kind of think that, okay, maybe they're not going to attack some law firms, but they actually did that. And then they recently did the same thing with West Point, I believe. And so all that's a little bit of the backdrop. You've also seen attorney generals across the country send letters to corporations, basically vilifying DEI. All this paints this backdrop, making it much more difficult for people to support founders of color, either through programs and or through investment, right? I don't know if anybody wants to add to that. No pressure.
I was going to add one of the things that I think is maybe more, well, no, let me not rank it, but very impactful has been the SBA.
Yeah.
They, let's say, paused the 8A program, which has been a long-standing program to, of course, help diversify government contracting. So that's another one just on the list of things that have been challenged. And yeah, so just wanted to add that because I think that one's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, outside of that, there have been some other things that make it more difficult for all startups, but particularly founders of color, diverse startups to be successful, as well as the funds that support them from an economic standpoint. Funding is much more difficult for all startups, including, again, diverse-led ones. And so just a general backlash around DEI. So let's kind of get right into it if you all are okay with that. I did have some questions. So normally I just kind of flow, but I don't want to mess up too much. So let's really start about, given this context, it's much more difficult seemingly now to support founders of color moving forward. How do you all, what are some of your views on maybe reimagining programs or doing things a little bit differently, or at all, are you just kind of doubling down on what you're already doing? And it's open to anybody that wants to kind of jump in.
Some of the areas that we're seeing specific success, especially in this funding environment, is working really closely with our founders and also tapping into the Techstars network to help them from a customer acquisition perspective. So we think one of the most impactful things we can do is to help them grow the traction they have for the business, and also develop that balance between strategies that are focused on growth and profit, so that way they really have a plan for their business regardless of how the environment improves or deteriorates. So we're trying to take a very tactical approach to helping their businesses be oriented towards survival first.
Nice. I don't know, Jewel, are you changing anything?
No.
Okay. Can you share a little?
Toes down.
Can you share a little bit more about the work at Collab Capital and what you all do?
Sure. So, no, to answer your question very directly, we're not changing anything. If anything, we are more emphatic about our mission. And to be clear, at Collab Capital, we invest in Black-led innovation companies. And that's always been the mission. We've never put anything else around that, because we started a fund specifically for the purpose of making an impact on what is a ridiculous racial wealth gap in our country. And so it would not be true to why we started it, why we got in this business, if we made any tweaks or adjustments out of fear, which, by the way, lawsuits are not fun. It's not great to have, the wind shift where people's focus areas are. That doesn't feel good. But we wake up every day with a very specific purpose and mission. And honestly, being a venture capitalist isn't, in the early parts of the business, a very lucrative place to be. So it's very much mission driven and mission focused for us. And so, no, we're not changing out of fear. I don't fault anyone who does feel like they need to make adjustments, but for us and what we're doing, the problem is so big, and it remains big, and it will be big until we have the focus level that we think is required to even just chip away at it. So no, we're not changing a thing.
Yeah, so I love you brought up the part around fear. So let's talk a little bit about the mindset, right? DNI, DEI, DEIB, all those, the term, the phrase and stuff like that, super important, right? But with the backlash, and I've had conversations with people of color, with allies in the space, that they're trying to do their things. And quite honestly, if they work for large corporations, a lot of people are putting their livelihoods, their jobs on the line by supporting these causes. But now they're going into meetings and saying and trying to use the terms DEI. Now they're facing backlash. It's harder to get funding and stuff like that. And to your point, to a certain extent, I don't fault people for still wanting to do the work, but not wanting to use the term, right? I don't know if you all are seeing anything like that or your thoughts on it, right? And so it's difficult, right? As a human, you're committed to the mission, and so you have to make this decision, right? Do I stand 10 toes down and still use the term DEI, DI, whatever you want to use, or do I stay committed to mission without using the term? And I also want to recognize for people that if they make that other shift, like still do the mission without using the phrase, how does that affect their values? Like, people are having some real, what I've heard in many conversations over the last few months, people are having some real difficult internal conversations about how they go about things. So I don't know if you all seen it, you heard it, any thoughts on it, or anything like that.
Yeah, so I was actually at a conference last week for B Corps across the Southeast, and that very thing that you just mentioned came up. And I think what it is that the people who are committed to the mission, kind of like what Jewel just said, they're doubling down. And if you have to use coded language, let's be very clear, we all do it every day.
Yeah.
And you have to use a language that speaks to the person that you're trying to win over, that speaks to the person that you are trying to get buy-in from. And that's fine. That's fine. We understand in corporate America, we have corporate speak for a reason. It is what it is. But I think if you are having an internal conflict, you need to really look at yourself and think about it. But from the people that I know who are doing the work, they're still doing the work. They may have to go into one room and call it something else that's not DEI coded. In another room, they're saying it very much with their chest, but they're still about the action. And that is what is the most important piece. Are you about the action when you go out and you do the work,
There it is. I don't know, Joe, yet.
One thing I just want to, I totally have heard people have these discussions and really sympathize and empathize with the conflict, I would say that generally I want people to not be so scary, because Edward Bloom and the people who support him are people, and they are mission focused. They have a different mission probably than most people in this room, but they're just people, and they are not shifting or changing. They've been on a crusade for the past 30 years, and that's why they're seeing success, because they've been mission focused and consistent. And also there's been shifts in, our country's courts specifically, as a result of who folks elected in. But my perspective is things are going to be challenging. They always have been. It's not new. We had a few, a moment where things looked a little bit brighter, but it was in the midst of tragedy. So to me, it's like this. The mission has to stay the same, and how we communicate around it, how we collaborate around it, should also stay consistent. And so I really would challenge people to not be so scary and not be so quick to jump into, okay, how do I change? How do I flex? And actually, no, just stand in what you believe. Talk about it how most effectively you can communicate the message and get the work done. But I think there's power in us sticking to our guns and sticking to what we said we were going to do and how we said we were going to do it, and doing that together. So I want people to not feel so scared and afraid all the time, because we are in a fight. That's just what it is. But if we all are standing back and waiting for how's it going to impact me, then we're not going to win.
Yeah. Excellent point. So let's talk about sourcing now, kind of shifting the conversation from mindset to, okay, now we need to find founders of color, right? And also I'm going to talk about this through the lens of maybe, people have to adjust their language, right? So maybe you can't use Black, Latino, all these other phrases and stuff like that. These essentially these labels, right, of humans. And so if you can't assume for a second, we do have to shift a little bit. You can't use it. Does that make sourcing more difficult? Again, where you're still committed to the mission, and how might you go about, change? Or maybe it doesn't, right? Maybe it doesn't. Anybody can jump.
So
Melissa?
I don't think it necessarily complicates sourcing, because we always take the approach of, so we bifurcate both at a specific stage, pre-seed, and we also have an industry focus. And the question that we ask ourselves as a team as we're going through the sourcing motions is, who wasn't represented at that event, at that community, at that organization, at that demo day we were at? Because fundamentally we can't know that we're making the best investments if we're not seeing enough. So, and also, regardless of how the marketing strategies and tactics change, community is evergreen. So communities are going to continue to convene in the places in which founders find support. And for us, it's really just about asking ourselves, where else are founders building that currently they're not being supported in the ways that they should, and how do we show up as a resource?
Yeah. Like I said, so I mean, to dig a little bit deeper, and this came from the Kapor Center's report, Leaky Tech Pipeline report years ago, right? Typically, a lot of startups that were received VC funding, come from informal networks, right? I mean, this is the whole thing around Goody Nation relationship gap. Typically, they work for they used to work for a big tech company, or they used to go to a top college and university, Ivy League, Stanford, and the like, right? Generally speaking, right? And so we found that many founders of color, generally speaking, are locked out of those networks. And so how might we, moving forward, do a better job of tapping into more informal networks that have maybe a greater density of founders of color, so that we can still identify top founders and give them the support they need, right? So do we look to certain zip codes, right? Do we look to certain schools? Do we look to certain organizations and things of that nature? Do we look to maybe like pre-accelerators and similar programs? Like, do you think it changed at all, or how do you all think about finding founders that way?
So, as somebody who's knee deep in sourcing right now, it really goes to what Melissa just said. You sit down and you think about where are the people that you're trying to reach, who was not represented at the events that you go to. You are being very intentional because we're intentionally good. So you want to take and have true intention when you go out and you source. It's like with recruiting for a job. I'm going to go out to all of my typical watering holes, and then I'm going to say, who am I missing? Who did I not touch? Who am I not seeing in my application pool? And then go out and intentionally find those people. When we talk about building networks and those informal networks, some of that is who are the people in your network? Is your network diverse? Are you making intentional connections with people from different socioeconomic status? Like, I did not go to an Ivy League school. So it would be very strange for me to have a bias towards people who went to schools that I did not go to. My degree is in merchandising. I do not have a traditional tech background. I do not have a traditional VC background. And so because I understand that greatness can come from pretty much anywhere, I'm always looking for the more, like, the non-traditional kind of places to look. But it's intentionality, I think. Outside of the marketing, outside of the other things, it's you being intentional with where you're going out to find companies.
Nice. I don't know if you
I also think you gave a great example when you were talking about pre-accelerators and other affinity networks, because one thing that we know that all founders need is community, and they're going to find communities in different ways. So I also want to dispel the myth that it's difficult to find founders who come from different demographic backgrounds. Like the organizations exist. If you truly can't find an organization like Google exists, but I think we could each list off the top of our head 10 or 15 organizations that we regularly look to when we think of who's the next great founder that we want to engage for our investment process.
Nice. So before we shift to actually investing in, like, say you find a founder, then you invest in them. Another thing that came from the audience in advance was how in higher education years ago, so before the recent Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action, similar thing happened with scholarships, right? So there's a lot of scholarships that were dedicated to people of color. So same thing happened, right? So one of the things that they did was, or typically like college and universities would say, write an essay on how your race, gender, so on and so forth may have affected you in your life experience, right? So hundreds and thousands of people are now writing essays. We already know with startups, there's a lot out there, right? You put the essay question out there. Now somebody got to read all these essays, right? And so you can say the same thing. Perhaps how might your race have affected your ability to raise funding, to get customers, and to get team members, and so on and so forth. The question
is how 8A is solving this problem, by the way.
Say what?
This is how the 8A program is solving this problem, by the way. They're for all of the folks who otherwise qualify because of their race for the program, those people are now going, 8A is requesting that they go back and write essays about how their life struggles or whatever, to help them keep their qualification. So,
right.
I mean, this is like that's kind of the solution that seems to work.
So here's the thing: as someone who's reviewed a lot of applications for programs and stuff like that, when you already got 1,000 to look through without the essay, now you got 1,000 to look through with an essay. Like, that's a lot of time, right? So now we're again bringing technology back into play. You can comment or not, right? But I think maybe there's a role for AI to play here and helping to look through some of these essays, at least maybe whittle it down, not to read them entirely, but whittle it down. Then the question is, well, who's actually creating that technology? People of color perhaps can write it to go from there. I don't know, right? So, it's an opportunity. Maybe Julie kind of rolled your eyes, but.
I just think all of this is so crazy. I mean, the contortions that we're having to do the reason that there's any of this conversation is because of a humongous systemic gap that exists in our country. People are doing great work to try to solve for what is very layered. We're talking about slavery, and we're talking about Jim Crow. We're talking about redlining. It's not just by happenstance that founders of color are not well capitalized. It's systemic. So we have put into place programs to try to address systemic issues, and the little smidge of progress was so upsetting to folks that now we're having to contort ourselves and figure out different ways to not call it Black and not call it, what it is, to me, it's crazy and ridiculous. So I apologize for my eye roll.
No, it's good. Hey, listen. This is why. I mean, I actually like it, right? Because to your point, I mean, having to contort, do all this stuff, in addition to having to do that really on a daily basis in this world is even more difficult. So let's shift the conversation a little bit to investing, right? Melissa, I actually want to come to you, talk a little bit about some of the areas in which you all focus for your program. And maybe so can you at least share some of the focus areas for your accelerator?
So we invest in founders who are building within a few different thesis areas. So first, commerce technology, consumer goods, so CPG, creator economy tech, and climate tech. And then we're working with companies who are all right around pre-seed stage. And through the program, we focus on two things: how they find repeatability in their product market fit, so creating some repeatable go-to-market process, and then helping them prepare to run a successful fundraising process. And then there's some specific tactics that we see are helpful that we employ for our founders that I think in a lot of ways addresses some of the fundraising challenges and challenges around timeline as well that we see.
Nice. And so do you see for in particular, maybe creator economy, commerce tech, that sometimes diverse founders or founders of color maybe cluster around some of those industries? In others, I'm gonna come to Jewel and Anastasia, maybe you see these things as well.
So when we looked at the thesis design, it was based not only on the team's background, but also we looked at where are the founders within our target demographic building. And so exactly what you're saying, we're seeing a high volume of founders building specifically in the consumer goods space and in the commerce tech space, where we also see alignment with the Black, Latinx, Native American, and Pacific Islander founder groups that we specifically want to focus on supporting through the program. And then on the fundraising challenge side, it's always been really difficult for our consumer goods founders to fundraise relative to their peers who might be focused on more SaaS-based products. And then overall, for the specific underrepresented groups of founders that we're supporting, we see that it takes them longer to fundraise relative to their peers. So this is where we see that things like programming through go-to-market and just constant network and immersion with investors helps to close that gap. We still have a lot of work to do, but every time we go through a program cycle, we look for some new nugget that works that we can repeat at scale across the portfolio.
Before, Jewel, I want to go to you in a second to talk about maybe some of the clusters, perhaps, if any, that you're either investing in or seeing. But Melissa, I want to dig into that a little bit in terms of the capital that perhaps isn't available to, or really the type of capital not available to a lot of the founders in consumer goods and stuff like that. Do you think that maybe VC isn't the right fit for them, or are there other types of capital that may be better?
So we try to remind our founders all the time that VC is just one form of capital, and so we try to encourage them to think about what are all the different sources of capital available to your business, and how should you be using them relative to the cost profile to your business, what the use is for, and the strategic value of those costs as well. So it's one of many different segments, but through the programming, we're hoping to help our founders get smarter about alternative sources of financing. And similarly, as a program team, we're always keeping our eyes and ears open about new innovative innovative programs and funding sources. One thing that we've taken a ton of time to look a lot closer at is actually CDFIs throughout the Southeast, and we see that as being a huge source for funding, especially for some of our founders who are saying, well, I just need help floating inventory for a purchase order, for example, for a shorter period of time. So there's still a lot of ground to be covered, but you're right, venture is just one small chunk of the overall funding pie.
Cool. So yeah, Jewel, I want to intensely come to you. We've had some conversations like the last few days, but before we kind of go into the capital piece, again, are you seeing the founders that you're either looking to invest in or actually invest in? Are they clustered in certain spaces?
I would say that I'll just say at Collab, we're looking for founders that are building what we call, building for consequential problems. So thinking about the things that most impact our lives, our work, how we're cared for, and infrastructure broadly, thinking about access to clean water, access to healthy foods, transportation, logistics, education, those kind of core areas that are literally what impacts our quality of life. Those are the things that we're looking for founders that are building in those areas. I would say that relative to founders that are building more in the consumer space or I would say more incremental solutions, there's a big disparity, but and particularly for Black founders. And the reason I think it exists is because we oftentimes in our daily lives we need to solve the immediate problem. We don't even have the time and space to think about the moonshot or if we could solve hunger, how would we do it? Luckily, we do have a company that's working on that. Bitter, that's Goody Nation, start company. But that's really what we're looking for. And I think helping folks have some time and space to think bigger. If you could solve any problem in the world, what would it be? That's really what I'm hopeful for, that people can have that ability to think bigger and that we can be the ones to write that first check in, to give them the ability to quit their job or do whatever they need to do to pursue it. But as far as do I see clusters around that? Not quite. I would love to, though. I was in DC yesterday, and I was in a meeting and I had to pick my jaw off the floor for how much money is coming down from infrastructure bill, CHIPS bill, all of these, government policies that also have billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars attached to them. And my hope, and I'm gonna say this, if you see me on the stage, I'm gonna be saying this. We need to be building the solutions where money is flowing.
Yep.
And where it has high impact to our communities. And so I really want us to do a better job of matching where there is abundance of resources and there's lack of talent. Just one thing, if anyone wants to build this. Right now, we have a huge labor shortage for the semiconductor industry, which we desperately need to remain competitive as a country. And we should be the ones building the solution. There are so many people who are doing workforce-like solutions, but maybe not with that specific focus around semiconductors. So that's like free idea if anyone wants to work on that, or if anyone knows anyone working on that, please let me know. But that's the type of thinking that I hope we can get to, where we are not trying to scrap for the bottom barrel of dollars for ideas where maybe it's not a match for the capital anyway, but we're actually looking and thinking bigger about where is capital flowing and how can we create solutions to meet the moment there.
Yeah, no, excellent. I mean, I had a conversation here around that same thing, trillions of dollars and stuff like that. Yeah, shoot, I may just go ahead and start. Maybe somebody else can. Yeah, this semiconductor stuff. Yeah, so again, Melissa, you're seeing some clusters of founders, consumer, commerce tech, Jewel, the spaces you outlined are just so happen to be some of the same problems that people of color face in this country and this world, right? And so we talk about different types of capital, right? Whether it's money coming from the government or other sources. But Jewel, I was at a conference with you a few days ago. You talked about. I just love what you all created, the space agreement. Can you just to make sure everyone here knows? Can you describe that a little bit? And perhaps why you all came up with it, and perhaps its potential impact on founders of color.
Yes. So when we started Collab, I think I saw Barry in here and Justin Dawkins in 2018 throwing ideas on a whiteboard at the gathering spot about if we want to create a way for a solution to the problem of capital access for Black entrepreneurs, and we are starting from scratch. We're not beholden to anything besides what we know based on our experience as founders and what we've seen, just, observation, what will we build? And the answer to that question was, we need to pool capital, so we're gonna build a fund, but the way that we deploy capital, we want to be a little bit different. And the product of that was the SPACE agreement, which stands for Shared Profits and Collaborative Endorsement. It's a mouthful, but the idea is that there can be multiple pathways to success. The binaries that exist in venture capital, where it's either you are on the path to become a $1 billion unicorn or you are a failure. It's basically, that's kind of the choices. We didn't think that that was sufficient as far as what should be available to Black founders. And we believe, honestly, based on my experience, that smaller exits, so I sold my company to Amazon and didn't achieve the $1 billion outcome, but did achieve enough of an outcome to be able to invest in companies. For, Dr. Nashley, who is my CTO, to be able to go and buy 25 acres of land in Jackson, Mississippi to develop. Like, we got enough to be able to do some stuff. And that is foundational to be able to now, the next outcomes be much larger. So we thought that that's important to be able to have pathways for that to exist and for us as a fund to still be able to get our returns. And so the answer that we came up with was profit sharing. So for companies that are on the space agreement that don't go on to raise that next round of funding, we convert into a profit share, and then we sit still with the company, still available for them as they grow, but not with the expectation that there's another round coming, and not the pressure point which investors typically have of when is that next round coming, because the way that we are assessed is by markups typically. And so the space agreement just gives us a little bit more flexibility and gives the founder a little bit more flexibility to build the business that makes sense from a growth perspective, from a market's perspective, for what they're actually doing, and also how the market has responded to what they're doing. The way that we think about it now is that is one vehicle in a suite that we can deploy that makes most sense for the business. So to Melissa's point, I think there is right now an over exaggeration of venture capital and its capabilities, and an under consideration of all of the other capital tools that are out there that may be cheaper for businesses and may be better fit for what their needs are. And so we think about the space as one potential vehicle that a company could use. And it's, we're kind of pushing it out there lightly to other people to try it out as well. We think about, low-cost debt. We think about how do we partner with CDFIs and other debt providers to get capital to entrepreneurs, and thinking really about the capital stack and how businesses can correctly identify what type of capital they need at what points in their business. So that's the full kind of story, but of course, always available to chat more about.
I love it. So in a second, we are going to go to you all for any questions and comments. So we have about 10 or so minutes of that. So again, kind of as a recap, and this thing around supporting people of color, around founders of color in this country, to the points made earlier, it's a fight, right? And so we had a little bit of a punch of our own, like the last few years, but like any boxer, I used to take some boxing and kickboxing classes. It don't look like it, but I used to. One of the things they taught us is that, no one's going to let you just sit there and punch them, right? They're going to counterpunch. So now we're seeing a counterpunch. So the question is, how do you fight back, right? We've seen how we can identify founders or the mindset around this issue. We've talked around perhaps some of the spaces in which they can cluster. We talked about some of the capital that we can intentionally provide them or direct them to and stuff. I don't know, is there anything you all, Melissa and Anastasia, you wanted to add before we go to questions and or comments? Okay. Cool. So then we have if you can raise your hand, it's kind of difficult from the stage. We have a question or comment here. I just say, just kind of keep it respectful, and if they can't answer, they can either say it or I'll say it for them.
My name is Pankaj Pramanik. I am from Charlotte, North Carolina. We came here to connect couple of VCs here. Sid Mukherjee, probably venture like Silicon Road Venture 47. We talk same language from the same state. All you discuss, whatever I have the same color. I am an American citizen. But the problem here is I came from tech background. Now I am renowned VC, global investment banker, fighting with all the top MBAs, Ivy League. By the way, my daughter is class 11, NCSSM, #1 public school. She will be somewhere, I don't know. But I am facing all over the world because of my name, Pankaj Pramanik. I'm facing from India because I'm from Bengal, not like a Mittal, Bansal, Agarwal. Here, exactly 24 hours ago, someone here, I approached them, they clearly bowled out because of my skin, because of my name, because of everything. You know, they are like a, do anything, but you have like a big, like a, do whatever they want, don't worry. You know what you are doing and what you provided on the, I am working on this, cheap, everything, the SMIC, TMMC already, Arizona, 2 hours late for the cheap. Probably connect me on LinkedIn, then you find out who the guy is. So we are working in the global market. I have tons of VC all over the world, but yes, we started at home, very humble background. Dubai, DIFC, our global headquarters is coming, then Singapore, then Switzerland. So definitely all these guys who punch me, who will next year probably 8 and 9 October, I'll be on that chair.
Gotcha.
That's my promise.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Let's do it. I look forward to it. There it is. There it is. Anybody else have a question or comment?
Hi, I'm Mumbi Dunjwa. I'm the founder and CEO of Naturaz. Naturaz is a science-based clean health and beauty company that formulates hair care products that are 100% vegan and infuse and sustain 3 times more moisture in curly hair. So thank you so much for all the insights you've provided on DEI. And when I first read about what Edward Bloom was doing, I was really disappointed, given that there's been, progress, but there's still a huge gap. I'm in the CPG world, tech-enabled, and it's really challenging to raise capital at this time while we are, during this time that we are raising. I also read that there are quite a number of chief diversity officers following this whole Edward Bloom that basically were leaving companies and so on. So I'm just curious about the corporate programming and what does that landscape now start to look like? Is it going to be, as rich as it has been, or do we expect that that is also going to be impacted? And also just in terms of CPG, do you see funding improving for CPG companies? I do know that the best way to go into market and differentiate very quickly, especially if you're a disruptor, is to have funding so you can nab some market share quickly. So thanks.
Anybody want to address it?
I'll say this since I no longer have a Google hat to wear. So I will say my perspective on corporate, because you mentioned about corporate funding. I would say that the type of corporate funding in the sense of the Black Founders Fund and some of like the Amazon had a program. A lot of companies came out with programs after May of 2020 in light of the murder of George Floyd. That was a very rare opportunity. It was not something that was ever designed to be longstanding and sustainable. And I'm saying this as the one who designed the Black Founders Fund. It was an opportunity that I ran as fast as I could through to get as much dollars as I could and put it out in the world and hope that that would be helpful. But I think that one thing that me and Joey, we talk a little bit about is like the mentality that might have unintentionally unlocked in founders, where the perspective is, I started a business, Google, do you have 100K for me? Or Amazon, what do you have for me? And that's just not realistic. Like, I'm very happy that we were able to get a lot of money out the door, and I hope that it continues. But I think from a founder perspective, you cannot expect that it will. And you really have to think about your business as, how do I get to my customers and get a cost model that makes sense so that I'm making more money than I'm spending? And anything on top of that, if I can get a grant or if I can get capital, will hopefully help accelerate growth. But generally, especially for CPG, the name of the game is how do I get customers to love what I've made and make sure that they buy a lot of it and make sure that I have costs that are low enough that I can afford to be in business. So I think getting back to the reality, which is nobody really has money to, in large corporations for sure, they're not in the funding, non-dilutive funding business. That's not what Google does, really. It was an opportunity that we took advantage of. But I think it's a hard reset that's needed for founders to get real about the fact that companies, that's not their business model. And you can't have your business model be reliant on somebody giving you some money. So hopefully that's not too real, but I really think that folks need to.
I mean, we can have this conversation. That's the whole thing. I don't know. I mean, I have some thoughts, but I don't. Anastasia, Melissa.
I mean, I'm gonna say Jewel just said it.
Okay.
Like she just said what she gave what needed to be given. So yeah.
Yeah. You good? Or here's what I would say from what we see, because we deal with a number of other large companies as well. Other context, economy, not the best over the past 12, 18 months. And so companies are looking to cut costs across the board in a lot of different areas. DEI space is just one of them, and you can talk about this excuse or not. Cool. But one of the things that we've seen, and I'm going to share with you how it exactly affects my life, is that now the companies that are committed, they have to, like, the human beings at these companies have to justify to their boss's boss why they're doing it, right? And so how that affects me is I get asked even more questions around what exactly we're doing, how it's how we're supporting founders, what are the metrics. I mean, the number of questions I get around impact have gone up maybe 10x over the past 6 months, right? Because I know they're taking those numbers and putting them in reports, and they're fighting for the dollars to be able to do it. And I got to imagine this happen all across the country with a bunch of different companies as well. But one thing I think will always remain true, and for anybody running programs out there and how it trickles down to founders, is if for programs in particular that are funded by large companies in this space, if you can show how founders of color can essentially buy their products, I think the companies will always continue to fund those initiatives. It may not be at the same clip as the past 3 years, but if you can show, especially like B2B startups, if you can show them buying products, and I'm going to say Google or AWS, but there's plenty of others out there, those companies will still spend because they're essentially acquiring customers. So we've seen some success in using that strategy over the last 3 to 4 months.
And one thing I'll add, because I don't know that we specifically touched on the DEI people in corporations and the fact that those jobs have declined significantly over the last few months. You have to also recall that corporations are subject to quarters. I mean, their decision making is in quarters. So, and if they're not meeting their numbers, they're going to be making cuts. And what's typically the first thing to go is the nice to haves, where it's not a direct path to the bottom line. And because corporations are thinking in quarters, it's very hard to draw a line between the DEI initiatives and how that is directly impacting the quarterly numbers. And so just keeping that perspective, I think it's not good, but it's the reality of the capitalistic society that we live in. So
Good stuff. Good stuff. We have time for one, maybe two. I think there's something over here. Maybe there's others as well. I can't.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Langston Thomas. I'm a political science PhD student at Georgia State University, and I also am a founder of a nonprofit that's working to improve policy outcomes for the public by leveraging municipal data on critical outcomes. And so I have a question for Jewel, excuse me. So what you said about the lack of clustering around addressing structural inequalities and trying to improve, societal outcomes for the general public, that really resonates with my experience in the academic space, in the nonprofit space, and even in the entrepreneurial space. And so my question is, how, as a young founder who is trying to think big and is also trying to find others who really want to build around empowering and uplifting vulnerable communities, how can we start that process of clustering, of finding other founders who are really intentional about addressing the roots of structural inequalities and building that community in the entrepreneur space.
Ooh, I love that so much. And you're already doing it. Just based on the background that you said in your intro, it sounds to me, I don't know you, but I want to, you are taking the academic understanding, the data-driven approach, and you're here in Atlanta. So you're doing a lot of things right. And I think one of the things, and Joe, I haven't talked to you about this yet, but I will. We have such a huge opportunity in Atlanta, and I don't know who's like from here or who's come in for this, but I think we've talked about this a lot. There's all the pieces are here. It's just that we don't always talk to each other. So we have, amazing research institutions. We have corporations. We have capital. We have entrepreneurs. We literally have all the things we need. But we have to be intentional about bringing all these pieces together and having the conversation of like, look, in Atlanta, we probably have enough people working on, XYZ. I won't call anything out, but there's probably enough people working on that. But what we're not working on that it would be critical to the future of our city is X. And with the data, we can identify these are the areas where we actually need really smart people building. And here's the money that the city or the state has available to do X, Y, and Z thing. And like building a strategy around that, which I think some ecosystems have done a really incredible job of. And I don't know that we've cracked the code on it quite yet. But definitely want to connect with you and make sure you're in the room when we're having those conversations, because that's how we get it done.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'll definitely connect with you.
Awesome, great question. Well, on that note, any last burning questions? Where you go?
Hi, Kelsey Russell. I'm thankful to be here this morning. I guess it's serendipitous that he asked that question first, because in my mind, I was thinking about how powerful it was that you said, you were talking about how much money is on the table for opportunities. And I think a lot of it is people don't know how much money. So in my mind, it went to, and then he's asking about how do you know who's working on it or who's not? What does a hackathon look like where you sponsor, Goody Nation sponsors, and it's like focused on here's the money that's on the table, like here's how many billions of dollars, and those who want to participate are in a room, and then you see the like-minded individuals. I mean, to me, that's where the explosion starts to happen. And anyway, I have goosebumps excited about it. So I don't know how I can participate, but sign me up. I will
I know someone.
bring water to the people who are.
I don't know if anybody knows this. Well, some people I know in the room know, but we started out doing hackathons for good. That's where the goody comes from. And
I'm new to this. So I'm
no. So
I'm like, where have I been?
we pivoted away from it to focus on more the Post Accelerator, but. March 1st of 2014 will be 10 years since that first hackathon.
Time to return to the roots.
And so, so just quick history lesson. Goody Nation started out as Goody Hack. The Goody part is it was hackathon for good, but a nod to Goody Mob being in Atlanta and stuff like that. And so we eventually evolved Goody Hack into Goody Nation. And maybe, so I was going to talk about this later. I am looking for an activity for our 10-year anniversary, and maybe that's part of it. So
go back to your roots. Yeah.
If you could either email me the idea, then we can talk about it. I'm serious. I'm serious. Okay.
But Joel, thank you for your discontent, because I think that's what's needed. And the more of us that we just get behind that and challenge everything, I think, sign me up and whatever I can do.
There it is. Awesome. Well, just in closing, how can people get in contact with you or learn more about what y'all are working on?
I am Jewel at collab.capital, Jewel Melanie on socials.
There it is.
Awesome. Techstars Atlanta, powered by JP Morgan, across socials, and our applications for spring are open now.
Nice. Until when?
They are open until the first week of December. I should know that date sometime. 2 months from now.
Okay. Well, get your applications in. Okay.
All right, and then you can find me, Anastasia Simon. I'm on LinkedIn. Best way to reach out to me, and our applications for Techstars Impact, powered by Cox, will be closing next week on October 4th.
Okay. Yeah, so spread the word and stuff like that. Give it up for these awesome folks. Okay. We're gonna get a photo right quick.